and welcome to NAEA's fourth Town Hall, Art Education in School Year 2021, From Skills to Concepts, Working Across the Curriculum in a New Environment. This is a long conversation with some very special guests who you will meet shortly. I'm Mario Rosero, your host for the evening, and I am lucky enough to be the Executive Director of NAEA, and I bring half of my career as a visual art elementary middle school classroom teacher and half as a supervisor in central office in Chicago and Pittsburgh, and then a few years at the Kennedy Center before joining you folks at NAEA. So a lifetime visual art educator and lifetime member. So thrilled that you're joining us this evening. Before we get started, I'd just like to take a moment to do a couple things. First, we want to just acknowledge the native lands and people that all of our communities can pay respect to and that we, our lands are based on. So if we can just take a moment to acknowledge. Thank you so much. And also I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge everything that everyone has survived and is living through and thriving this past year. Certainly been unprecedented. And we recognize both the ups and downs that everyone's experienced, and we want to recognize the energy, and your attendance tonight is much appreciated. Please know that closed captioning is an option for this session. If you go under transcript, you can turn that on, and there'll be more details in the chat for you if you need more direction. Our town halls that we host were created in order to give voice to the concerns, the issues, the questions that are top of mind for art educators and for our members of NAEA. And we wanted to make sure that we could provide immediate, timely feedback in live conversation with experts. So this is designed to meet your needs. These are open to all. And in order to make it a town hall, we ask those that register to submit questions in advance, and we get a range of really valuable questions that are woven into our conversation. So you'll hear your voices present in our conversations today. So the format that we take is a little bit different if you haven't been to a town hall before. It takes the form of a long conversation. Now that doesn't mean that it's going to be 3 hours in length. We'll stay very timely and on schedule for 1 hour. But what you're going to experience are conversational relays, where a pair of folks will start a conversation on a particular topic or thread. And then after 5 minutes, you'll hear a bell or a chime, and that'll be the 1 minute warning. They will wrap up within 6 minutes. And then one of the guests will exit and a new guest will appear, and there'll be a new conversation duo or pairing. And the conversation will continue and take a new shape or new thread. And that'll continue, so on and so forth. This has worked really well for us, and it gives you a chance to hear from multiple experts and different vantage points. We will do our best to leave time at the end for additional Q&A for anything that we don't cover in our conversation, and we'll be actively monitoring the chat to pull those questions. Please know we're also streaming on Facebook Live, so you can feel free to tell friends and colleagues to join there if they're not able to join on our Zoom. We had 486 folks registered, so we're really excited for everyone joining. And we recommend that you utilize speaker view in the chat. So at this point, I'm going to invite all of our guests and panelists to turn their video on, please. And it's my great pleasure and honor to welcome our first guest. So everyone out there in Zoom land, please join me in welcoming our first guest, Dr. Lois Hetland, Professor, Art Education Department, Massachusetts College of Art and Design in Cambridge. Lois, so thrilled that you could join us. It's good to see you, my friend. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's really nice to be here.
Great. It's really good to see you. So many folks know you from Studio Thinking and Habits of Mind, but we're really thrilled that you could lend your expertise and your big picture viewpoint to our conversation tonight. So just to get everyone that's joining us really centered on this conversation, we know that arts educators right now are being asked to teach across a range of environments. So I think most art educators that I speak with have already tackled virtual, hybrid, in-person, and then a rotation of those things that changes pretty frequently. And so that's really pushed us to work across our curriculum, and we want to ensure that we're not losing any elements and that we're teaching not just skills, but we're teaching concepts and context and history and those connections. All those pieces really matter. So, as I said, we heard a lot from members and there's a lot of questions on people's minds. So I wanted to start with Bailey from Massachusetts, who asked, how can we teach students to embrace independence, encourage creative problem solving, and take risks in a virtual setting?
Whoa, that is a tall order.
Yes.
You know, all I can think is acknowledge the kids where they are and what's going on for all of us, all around us. This pandemic is really a creative problem. So, here's what's fundamental. Go toward the child's experience and make the art an inquiry around that. And then help them be resourceful in finding and using what's around them as art making tools. And then use the group as a resource for more ideas and for suggestions throughout the art making process. So, I can give you an example.
Mm-hmm.
You could say, well, kids, what are you thinking about every day? Or maybe at night when you're going to sleep? What's hard right now? What's happening more than it used to happen before the pandemic? How can you describe what's going on for you during the pandemic? Okay, now let's switch gears, and you could do some stuff with that. Let's think about what you might have around the house that you could use to make art. We can use this Jamboard to write what you have that is okay with your parents or guardians. So then they post up, and then you can start grouping it. It's like, look, these two look like they go together, pens and pencils. You think crayons could go in this group too? What about watercolor brushes? Okay, so we're putting all the tools we use to make marks in one group. I wonder if there are other things you could use to make marks. Chalk, stones, food coloring. That's a little different because you'd need a tool to put that on, like something like a Q-tip or an old toothbrush or a piece of tape. So some of those things are both the stuff that makes the mark and the tool we make marks with. So, but the stones, now that's interesting because they're the mark maker and the stuff we make the mark on, and they can be the stuff we make the mark on, which we call a surface. So what do we usually use as surfaces? Paper and stuff. Are there other things we could use, like old lampshades or shampoo bottles that we could mark with a black marker? Or do you even know what whiteout is? And then for homework, have a conversation with your families about the stuff that makes the mark, the tools to make the mark with, and the surfaces you could make the mark on, and get their permission and then bring it to class tomorrow. And we'll get ideas from each other and think how we can express what it's like to live through a pandemic.
I love the idea of categorization and just, something that I might take for granted as an artist, of knowing how all those tools are used and their purpose and the different media, but just really unpacking that for students and families is such a great idea. And it makes me think about remember when I taught elementary art, I would always send a list of recyclables that I would request parents drop off. So egg cartons and any kind of plastic container, all those things became great fodder for art projects. So it's sort of taking that to another level. So we have another member, Kathy from California, is curious about, how do you teach studio practices when your online students do not have art materials?
Well, I think I addressed that one. Mm-hmm. But there's something I've done in professional development sessions a lot. It's making an ephemeral artwork. So it just lasts for the time of the class. And you make it from anything you can find on your body, around the room, in your purses or your bags or your drawers. And then I usually give them a title for the artwork. A lot of times I give the title, what learning looks like. But maybe this time it would be, what's it like to live in a pandemic? That might be better. And then they could brainstorm in groups about the materials they have, and then look at each one and think, what could that stand for about what it's like to live now in a pandemic? Mm-hmm. Then they build their works and share them with their groups and then with others. And I often use a thinking routine or two to guide the critique. It's not really a critique, it's just sharing. Something like See, Think, Wonder, or looking 10 times 2, where you have them observe and make a list of 10 and then make another list of 10. And, I use this to introduce the studio habits of mind. I'm not suggesting that here, But the good news is that when you do, it is really easy to find all of the different habits in that experience. And so don't worry, you can make art with anything, and you're doing something that addresses the full artistic mind.
And I really appreciate you sort of pushing on the process and product, right? This ephemeral idea is so lovely. It makes me think of, especially because one of our colleagues joining tonight is in the middle of a snowstorm, makes me think of Andy Goldsworthy's snow
Yeah,
models that would melt, right? They were ephemeral, and you would discover different things inside, but it was time bound, but it was just as much about the experience and innovative ways to use the materials as it was just the process that went into it. So I love that.
absolutely.
So knowing that you've got a bit of a bigger picture mindset for the field and trends of things that are happening, I wonder if you might talk a little bit about what you see or even predict might be next for art education.
This question really stumped me. I thought about it for a couple of days. It might be one of those fish in water things, people are already doing so much cool stuff, but everybody isn't doing it. So, but then I got an email just before this started from my friend Annie Storr, who raised a question about the space between school and home that's become more obvious because we're in this pandemic. And I think that she's right, that there really is an exciting space there as we get out of this pandemic. God think we will. But like the learning pods that have cropped up, extended family, could be regional, she says, or special interest, or maybe an expectation of more parent and school contact or interaction, and thinking about how to individualize and so forth. So all of that stuff, I think, is a really exciting space. And it reminds me of a school in India that I was working with, a college, an art college. And because they knew they couldn't come to the studio, they made this thing that they called the Here, There, Anywhere studio. And I think if we start thinking of the studio as a mental space as much as a physical space, that's a pretty interesting place to go.
Love that. And I think we can really put that charge on our audience tonight to think about, like, what might you carry forward from this moment in time that might inform or change your practice or connect more to your community. So really appreciate those ideas. So we always like to ask, as our final question for each of these pairs, Lois, what are you doing for self-care? How are you taking care of yourself right now?
I am doing so much. I have to say, I'm really focusing on that. Happens as you get older, you have to spend a lot more time taking care of yourself. But the one thing that has really been important to me is getting outside every day. And I mean, I've been walking a lot, and there's just something about outside air, this what you see, what you smell, the serendipity of it all, the wind on your face, and the surface underneath you. It's really grounding. And that changes my mood in the moment and over time.
Absolutely. Well, Lois, so great chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mario. And now we can turn our attention to Natalie. So Natalie Chanel Jones is the Director of Education at the Harvey B. Gantt Center for African American Arts and Culture in Charlotte, North Carolina, where, what did you say, it was 60 today, Natalie? Anyway, Natalie, I'm so glad to meet you and have this opportunity to connect. So can you tell us a little bit about your professional history and your current work?
Yes, so I started out in the museum world earlier in my career, and then I went back to school, and then I transitioned into public schools, where I mostly focus on urban populations and inner city areas. From there, I transitioned back into the museum where I am now in Charlotte, and I do a lot of work on teacher development, professional development, and right now I'm working on creating virtual tours.
Fantastic. There's so much that museums are offering people right now. I think you must be really having fun with that.
I am, and I think the key word for this pandemic is pivot. Everyone's having to pivot in one way or another. So
yeah. So you got to be good at that, like standing on the tip of your ice skate. Okay, well, let's turn to some questions from the members. Anne Renee from Washington wants to know more about strategies for teaching skills and concepts and being able to see our students and their art.
Yes, so for strategies, especially, in this time of the pandemic, I think it's really encouraging for students to just have them recenter at the beginning of class. So whether that's a 5-minute or a 2-minute meditation process, I think that really helps the kids to kind of focus and get their minds clear of what they're about to start creating and working on. The other strategy would be VTS, which is visual thinking strategies that just helps with teacher-centered thinking and for the kids to develop more critical thinking skills.
Yeah.
And as far as the seeing portion of the question, this can be tackled a number of ways. I think it's really important not to force students to share things via Zoom if they're not comfortable. I think a lot of times we don't really think about what type of environment they are in. They could possibly be in a group home, or maybe something is up with the house that they're currently residing in. They could be in a hotel. So one thing I found that was helpful with interacting with students is to set up a Google Voice number. And this way the students will have immediate access to you. They do not have your personal phone number, but they can text you images of the work and show you their process if they're shy about turning on their cameras and letting everyone in the class see what type of environment that they're living in.
It's as if you understood what the next question was from Jennifer from California, who wanted to know how she could make sure that her students are still expressing freely in this new environment. And I think that is one of them.
Yes, and I also think it's important, especially during this time, kids are at home, they're using whatever materials that they have at home. I think it's more important to focus on the journey than the end result. Kids are working through a lot of things right now, and the pandemic is just one thing we're trying to get over. After this is over, we're going to have to get over all of the effects that it's going to have on the children, and it's going to be lasting after the pandemic is over.
Right. We've got to weigh our priorities and reach and serve all the students. Are you seeing new trends and innovations in the classroom, and how museums and cultural institutions are playing a different role?
Well, I think people, and we need to commend teachers for the job that they've been doing so far. I think, yes, and I think it's just really amazing to see how everyone has transitioned into this digital learning space. And I think we're going to stay here. I don't think we're going to go back to, life pre-COVID as far as the classroom is concerned. But I think it's a really good opportunity for museums and cultural institutions to start implementing more virtual platforms for teachers in schools. I am working on a virtual tour for the entire 7th grade students in my district. And so hopefully moving forward, we will continue to do these virtual tours for teachers and students so that people outside of our states and our cities can still partake in the art that we have to display.
Absolutely. Nothing like seeing it in person, but if you can't, it's better to get it at all. How about you on self-care as we move on?
Well, you guys already know that I binge watch a lot of shows, but I forgot to mention that 2 weeks ago, I started doing yoga again. So yoga, binge watching shows, and making art.
Thank you, Natalie. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Lois. All right, now I want to introduce Orlando Graves Bolenos. How are you, Orlando?
Natalie, it's wonderful to see you, and I'll just make a shout out that Natalie and I are alumni of the School of Art Leaders, and so that's just a wonderful community to say good to see you again. Good to see you again. Yeah.
Thank you. Same here, Orlando. So welcome to the conversation. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work at the museum?
Certainly, certainly. So my work at the Museum and my career have really always been centered around a couple of things. One is art education, and the other is working with artists and creating artist residencies, either for the classroom or right now and most recently for a children's museum. So my work is to navigate working with contemporary artists and helping them translate their ideas to normally to socially engaged practice, and working to connect their ideas to an interactive in a children's museum. So it has to be robust as well.
And that's really important because they actually don't really teach you that in school, how to do that.
Yeah.
So that would be helpful.
Well, it's a lovely opportunity to continue with different types of communities, right? Working with artists to help translate things.
So Catherine from North Carolina is wondering about how can the art standards be best addressed during remote learning? Focusing on quality art making and higher critique discussion.
Natalie, I think you touched on something that those of us that are straddling the formal education field and the museum world is we're working really hard to make sure that these online services that we're providing are connected to teaching standards. So in my case, we're always attentive to the TKSs of Texas. I think that's one component, but I'd want to change a little bit the question and maybe approach it not necessarily from the perspective of quality art making, but maybe look at quality interactions, particularly if we're thinking about online. And I think we've sort of alluded to some of these things, right? Using studio thinking, using visual thinking strategies. Another thing in our toolbox at our museum is maker-centered learning, and there's another series of thinking routines that are very complementary to studio thinking. So all of these things give us ways to interact and talk about art and talk about objects that lead to deeper thinking and reveal children's thoughts about things. And so, you mentioned BTS. What about having kids curate images that they share if they're not comfortable with sharing their own work? So these are sort of ways that we can use the online community to create those deeper interactions around art.
Absolutely. I think you make a really good point about just navigating through some of the issues that the students might be having about sharing. There's definitely options out there. So Deborah from Texas wants to know, how does art education change? Do we teach for creativity or skills? How do you teach following directions without hindering creativity?
This might be the harder question, like Lois mentioned. You think about something, you rummage over it for a couple of days. For me, starting as a teaching artist and now being in a more of an administrative role, I see so many other skills that children are demonstrating to us, whether it be online or offline. And I think we need to sort of be really attentive to not only the skills that they're demonstrating. Are they changing their mind? Are they choosing things carefully? This cognitive flexibility is a really important aspect of the arts that we don't always reveal. Problem solving. So for example, we would say, well, if we're doing an art activity, it's creativity. And if we're doing a maker activity, it's problem solving. I think we all know that that's not entirely true, that we're doing an activity with our kids, and regardless of whether it's in science or in the arts, it gives us an opportunity to see what they're doing. I would suggest that we do things that we know how to do really well online so that we can focus on what the child and our students are doing. I think that that's very important, to not be so attentive to our own management of the activity, but more attentive to what children are saying, doing, and demonstrating to us. And I think that would be the key to these aspects of seeing and navigating children's creativity or other skills.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because, Orlando, of course, we're harder on ourselves and kids are way more forgiving. So if we focus more on the making, we'll be all right. So Jonathan, our colleague Jonathan from Illinois, wants to know, what effective instructional tips do you have for teachers that are simultaneously instructing students in person and online? And what strategies are you employing, Orlando?
You know, at the museum, we're very much consider ourselves an educational institution, and we operate in many ways like a school does. We're experiencing the same difficulties. I really must say that this is not easy, and I don't think there's anything that I can say that makes it easier. I would go back to what I just referenced a minute ago, and I just really want to hit that home is I think it's really important to be doing activities that we as teachers, instructors, facilitators, that we feel comfortable doing, so that we have some greater bandwidth in what children are doing and being more attentive to the screen. And that's not an easy task, but I know that we need to gain, we need to have a lot of confidence in the activity that we're proposing in order to have space to be more attentive to what our children are demonstrating online.
Great response. So our last question, what are your tips for self-care?
Mine's actually quite simple. Whenever I have the opportunity, a nap is very important to me. So I take naps.
Naps are definitely underrated. Okay, well, that wraps up our time, Orlando. Thank you so much.
Natalie, it was a joy to chat with you. Thank you. Well, now we're switching gears. Now it's my opportunity to present and to welcome Kimberly D'Adamo to the conversation. She's an artist and educator. I just found out that we share a love for learning, of lifelong learning. So I welcome you to the semester and to the school year and to your new educational goals, Kimberly, and welcome to the conversation.
Thanks, Orlando. It's really nice to be here.
I'm wearing a sweater in South Texas in your honor. You know, I don't really need it, but I know that you need a sweater today. I hear it's quite chilly where you are.
Yes, we have 15 inches of snow on the ground right now, and I think there's more slated to come down tonight. It's very exciting.
Well, I'm in the end, I'm very envious of that, of the snow. Let's get started with the questions. So I have a question from Yasmin. She shared this question. She said, since the pedagogies have been altered, assessments are still a problem area where we are all still trying to assess in the same way. How would you address this?
I think that's a really great question. Here in the Lincoln Public Schools, we're really focusing on changing our focus a little bit to making thinking visible. And in order to do that, we are encouraging students to have journals instead of sketchbooks. So it includes the kind of typical things that you would see in a sketchbook with practice of skills and techniques, especially in drawing, but also a place for them to do research, for them to sketch out project ideas, to document their thinking. And so that becomes something that we can have a conversation with kids and use as an assessment tool.
That's fascinating. I love the combination of all of these things going into a book. Scott from Wisconsin had a question. What are some strategies for building community during virtual learning, as well as keeping students accountable for their assignments?
Another really great question. I was just talking with a teacher here by the name of Isaac Jefferson, a really, really intelligent guy. And he said something that really struck me, which is know your outcomes and choose congruent behavior. And I think that if you want community, all your choices, both about how you structure your class and also the curriculum that you offer and the kinds of choices that you offer, should be about helping kids build community. So greeting kids by name, making sure that you're using trust building and team building prompts that go deeper than the typical, like, what's your favorite pizza topping, to questions where kids can really but where kids can really, I'm sorry, Julia Marshall is texting me and it's really distracting, Julia. Where kids can unfold a little bit of what is happening inside themselves to their peers, and really reveal a little bit more of themselves. I also think you can make projects that allow kids to take them in a more personal direction. So instead of the typical still life that we might offer in a drawing class, moving to a place where kids are choosing an object that has a lot of meaning to them, and giving them the choice to draw those. So really individualizing the choices and the curriculum for them.
This is lovely. I think there's a trend of our conversation around just the humanity, and just really connecting and being thoughtful of our kids, of our students, and how they're feeling at this moment. Let me go into the next question. Back to this idea of weighing out priorities in the art room, whether they are live or virtual. We have a question from Marie from Massachusetts, and she says, should art teachers focus more on lessons that are an emotional outlet, or more on lessons that bolster the core subjects?
I really love this question. And I think it's a matter of both and rather than either or. I think that we have to allow students to have inroads in their curriculum and use a sort of teaching for understanding model where they can find ways that what they're learning in school applies to their real life. And for a lot of kids, that means taking it in a direction where they're exploring the emotional turmoil or the emotional situation that they might be in, especially during the pandemic. However, I also think that we run the risk when we have students focus only internally of allowing them unintentionally to get stuck. And I've done this myself as a teacher, where I've let kids focus on their OCD or their anxiety and unintentionally not given them tools that they can use to get out of that. And so I think that piece of going outwards as well, of doing research outside of themselves, is one of those ways where we can allow kids to look internally, but also give them a set of lifelong skills where they can move beyond their current moment.
Yeah, I got stuck on anxiety there for a second, but I'm good.
Don't be anxious.
Speaking of that, I to close up our question routine, what are some of your tips for self-care?
For me, I'm at a point in my life where I'm watching my parents, who are still in shelter in place in LA, and they have been since March. I'm watching their cognitive decline, and I think it's really made it clear to me how much self-care is just spending time with the people that you love, helping them on Facebook learn how to do something new, helping them in a family chat conversation, making sure that they feel really connected and that they are not feeling forgotten during the pandemic.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. It was a joy to get to speak to you.
Yeah, thank you, Orlando, and thanks for the solidarity of the sweater. Appreciate it. So we're going to move now to welcoming Mario back. So Mario, I think we can really talk about this topic all night. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to say, as you know, we got connected when I was still in the classroom. So I was working in Berkeley schools. I just moved here to Nebraska this year to work for the brilliant Lorinda Rice and her team. And we talked about new and emerging approaches for art education. And I'm wondering what you're hearing as trends and takeaways from this conversation tonight. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yep, absolutely, Kimberly. And I always can't believe how fast these conversations go. We just get started and we're already getting towards the end. So I took some notes here. And so these are the things that stood out to me. So, I love the idea of ephemeral art. I'm just going to push that because it's a different approach, this time bound. And, I saw part of the chat was, how do I manage a supervisor that's doing an observation that wants to see a product at the end of 45 minutes. And, is there an opportunity to welcome folks that are maybe non-artists into the conversation to talk about that art can take different shapes and forms. So whether it's a process journal like you spoke to, or ephemeral art, just that there's a broader definition of what art is, and it doesn't all land on a product. So I just love that is a through line to this conversation. Things like using Jamboard, I think, is really helpful. Making thinking visible. We talked about some cultural sustaining pedagogy, this idea of humanizing the virtual environment. I love the, like emphasizing students' names, connecting with them. There's a lot of chat on whether or not a district has a policy to have cameras on or off.
Mhm.
Is that an opportunity to do self-portraits? If I have to have camera off, can I at least have my self-portrait up, right? So like if I stop my video, there's my self-portrait, right? And so how might that be an opportunity for students to show themselves in a different way and show up? And then this, just this whole idea about cognitive flexibility too. It's like really pushing us in new and different ways. So, I mean, just from tonight, there's a lot of themes and trends, I think, that are coming up. And the challenge on all of our shoulders is how do we get our head above the clouds or above water to go, okay, let me take a deep breath and really assess what I might want to carry forward from this moment in time.
Thank you.
Mhm.
I love the idea of the portrait and having, right, that's a big problem that I hear again and again, is kids not having their cameras on. And I love that way of kind of humanizing the space and keeping them all in the space. I'm wondering if you can tell us some of the resources that educators might go to as they're seeking strategies during this time.
Yep, absolutely. So hopefully everyone's monitoring the chat and we'll have access to the video, because there's a ton of resources that are shared that are connected to each of you. So visiting your own sites, museum sites, et cetera, please utilize those. But I'd say that one of the things that we come back to quite often is there's a group, the anti-racist art teachers have created a website that has really beautiful curated resources that I just like to highlight. Because embedded in all this work is how are we creating the most inclusive classroom environments to welcome everybody, and they have some really great tools and some upfront language about that. And then the only other thing that I might add is I'm a big fan of contemporary artists, and so the Art 21 series has some great ways to sort of unpack what artists are, how they're thinking about things, how they're addressing work, and how they're responding to the current moment. And it's all based on really solid skills and practices, but the conceptual ideas behind them are so powerful, and I think engage all of our learners. So that's always a tool that I go to quite often.
I agree. I think that Art 21 really models that integrated space that art is starting to take over. I'm curious what advice you would give to art educators right now.
Well, the number one thing is don't be so selfless that you're putting yourself last, right? As an educator myself and working with educators my whole life, I know that we always are putting everyone else first. And this is definitely a moment in time to make sure that you are resting, hydrating, re-energizing, and doing those things. That's why we focus on self-care in these conversations, to really promote the idea that you have to take care of yourself if you're going to really be there for your students. And so that's the number one most important thing.
I love giving teachers permission to take care of themselves. I really appreciate that. So what are some of your tips for self-care? What are you doing?
Well, I have my list, but now that I see Lois's cat that looks like the cousin to my cat, Millie, I'll say that I became a new cat dad this year. And so Millie brings me a lot of joy and or distraction, but both of those things are good. And beyond that, I try to, yoga and also walks outside are things that help, try to, in the breaks, try to grab those moments for sure.
Thanks, Mario. Thank you so much for organizing tonight.
Yep, great talking to you. Thanks, Kimberly. So folks, before we move to some additional Q&A, I just want to take a moment, if you could join me in thanking all of our guests this evening for this conversation. So thank you to Lois, Natalie, Orlando, and Kimberly for joining us and being so kind to share your expertise and your wisdom and to address questions that are really at the top of everyone's minds. So we received a lot of questions in advance, and I also picked some up from tonight. So I'm just going to ask a few for folks. So Jackie, and I'm summarizing, but tonight she put in the chat a question around what are some strategies to deal, and I'm going to open this up to all four of you, so whoever wants to take it. What are some strategies for engaging and supporting students that might be having a rise of feelings or emotions that come out at this moment in time? Like, what are some strategies that you've seen or utilized that you find are really great for supporting students that might be having those emotional moments? And, you know, admittedly, I think we as adults are also having those emotional moments too. So if anyone might want to jump in. Oh,
Bring extra
thanks,
support
Natalie.
to students, offering extra support, and just let students know that you're there for them, whatever that might be, you know, whatever they might need from you. In addition to, you know, you being their teacher. But I think right now, we all need extra support. So I think that will be really helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Natalie. And then we did have there are a couple questions around this theme of motivating students. And I like that one person used the word electrify students that might be becoming disinterested, especially in the, I think, virtual or hybrid environment. Any advice or strategies or ideas on that? Electrify in a good way. I'm good with teacher wait time, so go for it, Orlando.
Yeah, I was just gonna mention that we've discovered that because of social distancing, some of those group dynamics are just lost, right? Sharing scissors isn't something that we're doing this year, right? Or last year. But the thought is, you know, we've put up a podium in the museum for some of our camps, and that would be something that's similar to a classroom experience. And we have you know, we get the kids in front of a microphone with their own Elmo, and they get to share, you know, not only online, but just in front of a group that's socially distanced, you know, their work, and they get to use the Elmo, and I've just seen such promising reactions from 5-year-olds. And, you know, what great communication skills that we're normally waiting a little bit longer to present to them, those opportunities. So I thought that was something that connected a little bit with that idea of just what works, and try it out. Yeah.
I love that. And also just, you know, the idea that there are new and different ways to share our work, and maybe in a way that might get a little more attention or focus, right? You know, if it's taking up my screen, it might actually take up more space than if it's on the, you know, on the wall with, you know, 100 other pieces. So I like that idea of, you know, a different format for sharing work. And then, you know, the last question that I might pull out is just around, are there any ideas that we didn't get to share around play and experimentation? You know, clearly we're all passionate and serious about our work, but, you know, there is also a lot of joy in the art room and studio and art making. And I would just wonder if there's anyone had any other ideas you wanted to share on joy and experimentation. Kimberly?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that one of the things that's been really lovely is to see the teachers themselves playing with curriculum approaches and trying new things. And I think that I was talking to a teacher here, Yvonne Meyer, and she was talking about how it's great to play with the kids, and you also have to model what that looks like. Like, what does it mean to play? And so I would say that those are two things, like play with your curriculum and then model how to play for your kids so that they have those steps where they can take to get to that freedom.
Exactly, because they need to see it, right? They need to see how it works and give them, I think, you know, there's a theme of permission that's coming up this evening. Lois, did you want to jump in there?
Well, it was just, I was thinking that somebody had asked me to do this to do something to help people understand how to, pre-service students, how to understand how to present to their peers as if they were kids. And I was saying, okay, well, you know, look around on your desk. I've got this. What do you think is in here? I mean, do you think it could be a mouse? I mean, maybe it's, I don't know. Could it be chocolate? What could be? Well, let me show you. You know what I've got in here? It's these little felt balls. They're all made with needle felting. Would you like to know? I mean, that's a fun thing. I mean, what can we do with these? Look at them all. I've got like 20 of them. And, you know, what do you think we could do with something like that? And I was just realizing how just plain, you know, getting close to the camera like this and like talking in a different voice. And like, did you see this thing I've got? Look at this. What do you think I could do with that's really skinny? Wow. Anyway, it's like it's nothing, but there is such a way of sort of, and then asking them to do those kinds of things. It's like, you know, have you got something that you could show us and show us really close? Let's everybody look at your eyes. I don't know. I'm just being goofy, but I think those kinds of things just, I mean, look, everybody's smiling. You know, it's like being silly is a great way to get other people to loosen up.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and you know, look, we can't lose sight of the theater. You know, there's theater in being a teacher, and I mean, I don't even know if we're using anticipatory set language anymore, but that's how I was trained. And it makes me think that we always thought about like, what's that way to hook students and engage them, you know, at those key moments. And, you know, I love the leaning in, I love the whispering, and then the mystery of what's inside there, right? And, you know, really pushing everyone to, you know, rise above the stress of the now and to find some joy and some play in the work, because it will reward you and your students and rejuvenate you. So thank you to all four of you for a lovely conversation. This was just so rich, and I hope that all of our guests now and the ones that get to watch this recording will take away many great ideas. I have a few things to share with everyone as we wrap up. So I think we're going to transition to a few slides, and if my panelists can just hang on with us as we go through these, that would be amazing. So team, if you can transition us. You're going to see the magic happen here in a second, I promise. Or we're going to all do Lois's lean into the camera and imagine what's supposed to be on your screen.
There was a sweet comment in the chat from Louise Music about Lois being the new Mr. Rogers. It made me think about, you know, when I started teaching, I watched a lot of TV dramas about teaching to learn how to be a teacher because I didn't know what else to do. But maybe we all need to start looking at Mr. Rogers and those kinds of shows and really learning the techniques that they're using on Sesame Street to bring kids in through the screen. I think it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Mr. Rogers was always my hero because, and you know, what always stood out to me, there was a great quote of, so after he passed, they replayed some interview with him on NPR, and they said, you know, sort of like unpacking his approach. And he said, you know, the worst feeling in the world is to feel excluded. So everything I do is meant to include children. Mm-hmm. You know, I would never do anything to exclude someone because that's the worst feeling in the world. And that always really stuck with me. All right. Thank you for vamping, my friends. So a few things to look forward to. Hopefully you enjoyed tonight's town hall and previous ones. We have 2 more upcoming in February. On the 9th, we're looking at the art education continuum. How do we build a pipeline to foster future generations and strengthen our field? Very exciting. On Tuesday, February 9th. We have a special edition town hall on February 16th at a little bit earlier time at 6 p.m. Eastern. There's a new campaign to promote arts education. Arts are education for all, and there's some really great tools about connecting with your board, connecting with your elected officials to really make a difference in advance of next school year. So this is a great webinar and town hall to join on the 16th. Please know that NAEA is here for you. We have a ton of great resources that were curated by your peers. So it's not like doing a Google search and getting 1,000 results. These have already been vetted by your peers that understand your work. Our remote learning toolkit, you can scan that QR code right now or go to the website. They are organized by your division and your expertise or level, but we also have created these great tip sheets. There's one for remote learning, hybrid learning, in-person instruction. And then we are just launching a brand new tip sheet for getting started with equity, diversity, inclusion. So no matter where you are in your journey, this helps you on that cyclical path to really get yourself centered and be able to work with others. So we highly recommend that. And a lot of folks, when they submit questions, ask for advocacy tools and ways to make the case for the value of arts education. And even though that wasn't the focus of this evening, wanted to make sure that we shared some of the resources. And so we have a series of open letters from our board president and our president-elect that are really, there's one that's to school decision makers, school board members, and principals for the value of art educators in the classroom. There's one for museum educators, and we have university and college one, as well as one on Black Lives Matter and anti-racist art education. So lots of resources. I just like to promote these because oftentimes people ask for them and don't realize that they actually already exist and they can have a real impact. They're written with qualitative and quantitative cases to back up the information in the letters. So we can go to the next slide. Please, if you enjoyed the community that you felt tonight among your colleagues, please join us for an even larger community for the first ever virtual 2021 NAEA National Convention, March 4th to the 7th. Look, this is the best price and best deal because not only do you get access to the whole convention live in the moment, but everything that's recorded is available for 6 months afterwards, and there's over 400 sessions. So this is like professional development for the rest of the year. We have Carrie Mae Weems, we have Jason Reynolds, Mo Willems, and Second City. Really amazing, relevant folks that care about our work are going to be our keynotes, as well as member-led workshops and sessions.
Jason Reynolds is amazing. He's amazing. He's written so many books for young adults, and they are fantastic.
And this man spends all his time with students and teachers, so he's going to really connect with our audience. We are thrilled to once again offer our opportunity with School Arts. If you join and renew with NAEA right now, you can receive a free 1-year subscription to School Arts magazine. This is something that many of our members love and treasure, and I know that I have all of mine that I received as a member cataloged away in my office as well. So please consider joining and renewing, and consider convention as well. And I think we're almost on our last couple slides here. Because we want to be relevant and give you timely tools, our guests tonight have already contributed to this handy dandy guide that gives you some of their great thinking and thoughts that we talked about tonight. So you can scan this QR code or go to that website and you can download immediately this handout, and all the town halls have one of these. So if you go to the NAEA website, you can find one of these there as well. All right, folks, I think we have gone through all our information. Thank you everyone again for joining. Thanks to our panelists, and we're going to close out with our animation.